So obviously, I've read up about the show, but explain for our listeners who might not understand this what exactly the premise is, because it's almost too crazy to even believe that this is a real thing that can happen.
The Thailand, the Department of Corrections in Thailand has a program where you can essentially fight your way to freedom. Muay Thai is the national sport. It's deeply embedded in the culture. And they now have a program, they've had for several years now, where a fighter who distinguishes himself in combat while incarcerated can earn his freedom, even a royal pardon, which will, in effect, expunge his record and eliminate evidence of his crime. So it's a pretty good deal if you can fight. What drew me to it is that ultimately, as a dramatic construct, what you have is Dana White meets Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment.
Yeah, it seems like almost like The Condemned or The Most Dangerous Game or Battle Royale played out in real life. Like, what's the consensus among residents that this is even allowed to happen? Are they generally cool with it?
Well, I mean, look, the prison bureaucracy and the politicians in Thailand are comfortable enough with it so that it, in fact, exists. I don't think that people are up in arms about it, except the only people we spoke to who really had a deep-seated issue with it, the families of victims. So, and I don't know how, they're, in a certain sense, pretty close to disenfranchised.
Yeah.
It's a corrupt criminal justice system to begin with, and I'm not saying that prison fight is itself corrupt. I mean, it's certainly worth debating whether whether allowing convicts to go free because they can fight is just an entirely perverse proposition, or there's something to be gained by it. I think you can argue. You can argue either point based on the case of the inmate, but there's no widespread outrage, nor is it a culture that tolerates widespread outrage.
It just seems like well, first off, how does something like this get pitched? Like, do you all find out who the person is that just
as a film?
No, not even as a film yet. The person who pitches the idea, hey, let's have these guys fight each other for freedom. Let's do that one. Like remember that Steve Austin movie where he had to kill people on an island? Let's do that, but here.
Well, there are a couple things that happen. First of all, Muay Thai is, again, it's not just the national sport; it's a national pastime. It's
ingrained
tethered to all sorts of, but it's also tethered to certain religious strains in Thai life and Buddhist strains. It goes right through the main artery of Thai culture. So you begin with that. It's not just fighting to most Thai people. It's something else. It's something higher. Apart from that, what happens is they had a couple prisoners. They had a huge meth epidemic, which resulted in very high incarceration rates. And the Department of Corrections is looking for a way to get some good publicity. And they had a couple of champions in prison, one of whom starts a drug addict, starts fighting in prison. And a lot of people turn pro when they're little kids. When a fighter, another fighter, and they go on, they win titles, or one of them won an Olympic medal. And they go, wow, this is we can do something with this. And some foreign promoters get involved for a while, and they start to popularize this notion of prison fight. The pivotal character here, and he's a character in the film, is a guy named O. And he was like Thailand's Manny Pacquiao. He was a conventional boxing champion and a big celebrity. He gets caught with some meth. He kind of hints that he was framed. It's not an entirely convincing case to me, but the drug laws there are draconian, and he gets 20 years for a little bag of meth in his pocket. And he got his sentence bargained down because he's rich and famous. But he has to do 20 years, and he's a famous guy. And so what he starts doing, actually, his father sells the idea is, O is famous, let him put on some exhibitions. And they then call it prison fight. So he popularizes the notion of prison fight. So he's, getting glory for the bureaucrats and the wardens, which is really essentially important to these guys. And from O, you formalize this concept of prison fight, which is where we come in, some years later. And our film is organized somewhat around O and the history of this, but mostly about an inmate named Muay Thai, who was a gang leader, and killed a guy, stabbed the guy in his neck. And we pick his story up in prison. He's already won 7 fights. In his 8th, most likely will earn his freedom. And if you've ever done any reporting in prisons, you know 2 things about every inmate you speak to. Number 1, they're innocent. Number 2, they're very charming. Noy really wasn't in a position to claim his innocence, but he was exceedingly charming and made a great case for himself. And we introduced the viewer to his family, his mom and dad, who are, working their asses off in a chicken shop, and finally to his son, who was 2 when Noy went away, and now he's like 6 or 7. And there's a scene where the son visits his father, and he's been told his father is just away training as a Thai boxer. He's not in prison, and you see the kid looking. You can't help but for Noy to win his fight, get out of prison, and be reunited with his son. And then the tables turn, and we introduce you to the family of the victim. So you should feel good and conflicted about this.
Yeah, I certainly do. Just listening to that, like it seems like it pulls you every which way. How does somebody like you find out about the idea of these fights, like in the pitching process to Showtime?
Right. There was a freelance cameraman, producer, director, aspiring director at the time, named Micah Brown. And I would see him football combines, pro days, shooting stuff, and he was looking around for a film. He played football at Kansas, interesting kid, God-fearing Christian, not a profane New Yorker like me. And he decides he wants to do a movie on this prison fight. And so he goes to Thailand by himself, meeting, guys in steam rooms and alleys trying to set this thing up. And he does. And in many ways, the film is an expression of his incredible determination to get this thing done. He comes back after several trips, and he pitches it to my producer for the All Access series at Showtime, Jason Bowers. Jason brings it to me and said, "What do you think?" And I go through the stuff, and I said, "Okay, what we have here is Dana White meets Dostoevsky," and I stand by that. I think it's fairly accurate. It remains a fairly accurate assessment of the dramatic construct that we have. I said, "I'm in." So then we sold it to Showtime, and we went over there and shot a movie.
This whole situation, I'm still like shocked. I mean, I've covered MMA for years, and
right,
the idea that this can happen anywhere, is
can't
almost
happen anywhere.
Yeah, well,
it can't happen anywhere.
The fact that that it does happen absolutely anywhere is mind-boggling and so interesting.
Oh,
so
I remember covering, like, I remember the first, I don't mean to go far afield here, but I remember the first, like, some of the first MMA, first UFCs, even before the Fertittas and Dana were involved. I mean, I remember covering one of the early UFCs. I forget which Gracie. Like, he was the skinny guy with a gi, and it was and they were fighting like wrestlers and kung fu guys, and there was no size limit. There were no divisions. I never thought I'd see that. So and that was always like the question of what would happen if like a karate guy faced a boxer or a judo guy faced a wrestler, and then you had the answer to the question right there. So I lived long enough to see that. Seeing guys fight their way out of prison, I guess. I've seen two things I never would have considered likely.
What is the worst offense that you have seen basically absolved, or not necessarily absolved or pardoned, but the worst you've seen somebody get off the hook via this situation?
Well, I don't want to give away the film's ending.
Okay.
But, Noy is a murderer.
Mm.
So he does pose that question. And as we know from covering combat sports, yes, they're sports, but they're also something more. Ultimately, what we're talking about in combat sports is violence. And you wind up asking yourself the question, can violent men redeem themselves through violent acts? And that's not, that's different than, playing soccer or baseball,
Absolutely. So anything else that you need to let viewers know ahead of this? I know it premieres Friday, February 24th. This is quite the concept, quite the not necessarily concept, quite the topic to tackle.
Right. Well, it's Dostoevskian.
Yeah.
Look, it's crime and punishment. It's hard to screw that up, and I hope we didn't, and I don't think that we did actually. There's one, one of the things that comes to mind is there's a whole class of expatriate fighters in Thailand, from Marseille or from Australia or from the kid we have fighting in the concluding fight scene is an American from Wichita, Kansas, and he came to Thailand because he was basically a screw up, and you see what he's learned, you see what the sport and the way of life has given him, and he says, listen, if this guy's killed someone, and it's up to me whether he goes free, I can't make it easy on him, and he doesn't.
Very interested to check this out. I encourage everybody else to as well. If you're listening to this before Friday, check it out, 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Showtime. I want to thank you so much for joining me.